Hey, everybody. Welcome to Cinema A to B, a podcast about, well, where Ben and I talk about movies. I mean, that's pretty much it. Or in TV shows occasionally. So today we're going to be talking about the 2021 film Dune. So, Ben, I know you and I have kind of talked around the edges of this movie, trying to save this for this show. So what are your thoughts?
My thought is that there's probably only a handful of directors that were capable of bringing this effectively remake back to life, and that Denis Villeneuve is probably the best guy for the job. I mean, it's a very short list. I'd probably put Christopher Nolan on that if he was interested, but yeah, it's kind of been the challenging book to bring to life. It's so dense, and the problem is with the source material is that you've just got the inner thoughts of characters that just go on for pages and pages and pages, which is fantastic in a novel. But when you're trying to adapt that for the screen, it just becomes laborious. And so I think that's the big strength of this, effectively part one, right? It's Dune part one. I think that's the big strength of the script, and part one is they seem to have been able to ride that line pretty well on giving you kind of a taste of what that was in the book form, but it's definitely firmly its own thing as a film. Yeah, no, I loved this movie when it came out in 21. It was one of my top 2 or 3. I don't remember if it was my favorite thing that came out in 21 or not. I'd have to go back and look, but it was definitely up there.
I mean, I will agree. It was fantastic. You know, Lynch's 84 Dune, you know, I mean, he says he hates it because he didn't have final cut approval. So you can't really judge it as his film because, well, you know, it got kind of taken away from him. So I say that, but this, I think you nailed it where it did it really right, because there's a lot of political intrigue that gets bogged down and a lot of exposition and stuff in the book. And here, I think Denis kind of still had that political intrigue. Obviously, it's still there, but didn't let that overtake the film. Kind of kept it moving, kept the interest and kept it violent and actiony, but yet not changing it drastically from the political intrigue book that it is into this is kind of like, you know, action drama kind of a thing. So I think he really hit that line of kind of keeping the visual aspects of it to be interesting, as well as kind of keeping some of the more cerebral thoughts and, you know, kind of underpinnings and stuff going throughout the book in the movie. So I know it's not exactly the book. It's got some differences, but I think those were good choices to make.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I, just an aside, there are aspects I absolutely adore about the 84 version of Dune. I do not hate that movie. No. I grew up with that version of Dune. There's things about it that I frankly love. There's some visual aesthetic of the 84 Dune that I think is really cool. And largely the casting in that movie was really pretty good. Mm-hmm. But I won't stay parked on discussing that movie. Maybe we can revisit that down the line. But Denis got this movie, I'm convinced, because of his ability to command the aesthetic. And effectively, something like Blade Runner 2049 and then Arrival were basically served as dress rehearsals for him to be able to pitch himself to, what is it, Warner Brothers?
Yeah, Warner Brothers.
Yeah, for him to be able to pitch himself to Warner Brothers is to be the one that helmed this.
Because he did Arrival in like 2016. Mm-hmm. He did 2049 in 2017, and then he took another 4 years. Well, I guess, I mean, depends on if he was still working on it when they pushed the release date, because it was supposed to release in December of 2020. But still, I mean, 4 years to kind of work out this masterpiece of trying to wrangle Dune and put it on screen.
Yeah, and it's got those... It's a throwback with the visual effects, because it does what I love, which is he accomplishes as much as possible in camera with practical effects and scale models. Some of the best model work you've probably seen to date because it doesn't look like models, but it is. And then combines that with high-end compositing, and then just probably a lot less CGI than people would think is in this movie. And it all feels unified, and Arrakis feels as big as it ever has. And
dangerous. Yeah.
And oh yeah. Yeah, very dangerous. And now I love to bang on Oscar Isaac because I think he's like the most overcast guy in Hollywood. And I'm just never a huge fan. He's good in this. And I need to give him his due, because he plays unaware kind of naivety to the character that I think it needed, that you don't get in the original. Because Duke Leto in the original is just much more commanding, and you almost would be like, wait, that version of Duke Leto would never walk into a trap, right? But this version of the Duke, it feels right that he basically is hoodwinked.
A little bit more honor bound, a little bit more kind of, this is what we do to serve.
Yeah, kind of blind,
cares. Yeah,
blind honor in a lot of ways, and he brings that. And so I need to give props to an actor that I tend to bang on. And it's not because I think Oscar Isaac's a bad actor. I don't. I just think he gets stuffed into everything. Star Wars. He's the shortest version of Apocalypse ever put on screen in the X-Men. Which I just was like, wait, what? And
I forgot about that.
Yeah, he's in a lot of stuff. And then the rest of the cast is just spot on. We can single them out. I mean, I think Rebecca Ferguson showed more to her repertoire as an actress in this than what she's been given. Because I'll be honest, I mean, most of the stuff I've just seen her in was like the Mission Impossible movies, which she's been in the last several.
Yeah. And she was in Reminisce and The Greatest Showman with Hugh Jackman. For those
was she in Showman?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was the singer that he kind of, when he wanted to go legit.
No, I really like watching her. She has, obviously she's gorgeous and striking, but she has very, very uncanny screen presence.
She's able to kind of control her body and control her face to really kind of push across the emotion or the lack of emotion in some cases, especially in this film. So
yeah, and she that's a very central character. I mean, Lady Jessica's super central. So you couldn't just willy-nilly cast that role.
I was going to say, like, when I saw that Jason Momoa was going to be Duncan Idaho, I was not happy right away, because kind of how you feel about Oscar Isaac is how I feel about Jason Momoa. I'm just like, oh my goodness, they're just going to throw him in here as well, whatever. But he brought it. Like, he really brought it. And all those fight scenes are pretty much him fighting. Like, that's legit. Like, he went to training. They had the fight choreographer, Juan or something like that. He just worked with him, and he worked with like 15 other stunt doubles to kind of get that fight scene, and the fight scenes that he's in done really well. And I mean, it just worked. It just absolutely worked.
Yeah. And then obviously old Timothee, I was excited when he got cast to do this, because I'd basically drank the Timothée Chalamet Kool-Aid from his 2019 Netflix movie, The King.
Oh.
And that was the film that I saw him in that I went, oh yeah. Yeah. There's a speech he gives, in The King.
Yeah. That's
some of the finest acting that I saw from, 4 years ago of anything I watched. And it was him. And so when he got the call to play Paul, I was like, yep, gonna knock it out of the park. And knocks it out of the park. And he's more book accurate, because Paul was a lot younger in the books than what we got
15
in the 84 Dune. So
yeah, he looks the part a lot better. No, I'm with you. Like, he definitely held his own. That was what I was thinking about too, was the king, especially kind of near the end, like the latter third of the movie, when he's starting to kind of deal with some stuff that I was like, this feels like you're the king.
Yeah.
Like you're just kind of playing that same kind of role, but it works. I mean, it still works. Like it is that character. It's that kind of that thrust of having to be responsible, that thrust of having to lead kind of a situation. And it just works, and he plays it off really well. Like the entire casting is fantastic. And I think I was reading, I remember when this came out, was almost everybody is Denis' first choice. Like that's who he wanted to play it. I think the only people who weren't were the doctor,
okay.
Dr. Yu, and I forget why. And then it was also Shawnee Zendaya. So I think she was picked. Like he didn't have anyone exact, but it was the screen chemistry between the two of them, and that's what got her the role. So,
okay.
But everyone else was pretty much like, he was like, "This is my person. This is what I want."
That doesn't always happen. In fact, if you devote yourself to looking that very topic up, basically directors' choices for major roles in big movies, you'll find that rarely do even big directors get their first choice. It just scheduling conflicts, and then the fact that everybody's going after the same person for roles. You know, they're up for 3 or 4 roles, and they're going to pick one. So yeah, you got to be prepared. The problem is a lot of this stuff's written with specific people in mind, which is kind of a tricky thing to do. They always taught us in film school to not do that. Yeah. Of course, you're in film school, it's a student film, but you'd still get caught. Like if you knew an area actor that you wanted to hire, or a friend that, you know, is particularly talented that you want to put in it, you'd find yourself writing those roles specifically for those people. And then what happens? Somebody's not available, somebody gets sick, and then you're like, whoa.
And you got to deal with their other friend who's an actor who's just terrible, and then he's in your short film and you don't even finish it.
Well, I love that I just like falsely portrayed myself as a writer, which I'm most definitely not. Not a screenwriter anyway. I can write copy, but it's got to be 30 seconds or less. Now, obviously, we are huge fans on the show of Mr. Stellan Skarsgård.
Oh my goodness. And of course, he brings it just as always. It's just
and
amazing.
had to have been Denis' first choice.
Oh yeah, he was.
And
absolutely.
But the makeup and prosthetics are just something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not just for him, but for the whole thing, the costume design, the set design. Mm-hmm. It's so brutal.
So what I was reading for Skarsgård, they actually built suits for him, like created just suits that he could get in and then spend 4 to 6 hours of then doing makeup to blend in everything. But those are just huge suits that they use. So like, again, going back to some of those, lot of those practical effects, and not just like, hey, let's just, put something underneath his shirt. And it's like, nope, that's kind of this huge fat suit that he's in, and he has to kind of walk around it and do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a loaded cast and it's not just major roles. I mean, you've got Stellan, obviously, you've got Javier Bardem as Stilgar, which
always makes me happy when I see.
Yeah, it was really a pleasant surprise because I purposely didn't study up and read up a bunch on this movie. I didn't want to spoil a bunch of stuff for myself. So, but the guy I want to talk about, who I feel like steals the movie for me, is this Babs Olusanmokun, who plays Jameis. Oh, okay. It's his performance is really good. Mm-hmm. He's got a really nice timbre in his delivery, but the way that they decided to execute those dream state sequences with that character and Paul, those are my favorite moments in the entire film. Mm-hmm. This whole idea that he almost lived like half a lifetime with him out in the desert in dream form and learned from him is that's like my favorite stuff. The whole speech he gives about life being a process. Not basically it's about the journey. It's not about the end. That was my favorite time in the whole movie.
Well, and then juxtapose that with how he is in the end
in the real world.
Exactly. And just kind of, it's almost like two different characters, like two different, well, obviously, yeah. I mean, but like it's this, how he plays it and the raw emotion and energy he gives in that last performance just struck me of just how powerful and just how he just was there and was just giving it his all. I know he had to walk off that set just absolutely exhausted from a day of shooting. Just seemed like giving his all for every shot. It was
an interesting creative choice, the way they did those kind of waking dreams that Paul has. And that's something this movie just does leaps and bounds better than the earlier 84 version. And you have this sense of loss of like what could have been between Paul and Jameis. That stuff is kind of what separates this movie from just your run-of-the-mill sci-fi action piece. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about just expectations for part two. I'm trying not to do the spoiler elite thing and ruin things for myself, but Villeneuve has stated that it is basically a war film.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I need to read. I'm just
super excited for it.
Yeah, it threw some people off that it was only part one. Like the way it ends, if you didn't go in, and now they give it to you in the opening credit that it's a part one, but I think people forgot. And then the way it ends, it's like, wait, you're going to leave me hanging?
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, this is what this is. On Cinema A to B today, we're really talking about one half
of a movie.
Yeah, effectively. Yeah. The Dune Part 1 is not a complete movie. It's really good, but it is literally half of basically a 6-hour movie or something approaching it. I don't know what the runtime's going to be.
I guess this one was definitely long. It felt paced really well. There isn't a whole lot of fat on it that you can really cut. There was a couple times where I was just like, I didn't feel like it was going long, but I was like, okay, this not super necessary. We could have probably cut this, but his shot selection and some of the views and the vistas he was getting from where they were shooting was just worth it. And as well, just to kind of like you were talking about, give that grandness to Arrakis, give that kind of just how really large and how vast this desert planet actually is.
And the runtime for Dune Part 1 wasn't bad. It was 2 hours and 35 minutes. It was not this laborious thing. No. Now I know. Now Part 2,
probably.
I don't think we've got a finalized runtime on Part 2. No, we don't. I mean, that thing's still in post-production. So I would be venturing a guess that it's nearer to 3 hours.
Oh yeah.
And that it will be one of the top 3 movies of 2023. Because the only other movies that I'm really anticipating are obviously Oppenheimer and then Killers of the Flower Moon with Scorsese and DiCaprio, which I think I'm going to call it now.
That's your best picture.
Killers of the Flower Moon is going to win Best Picture in the 2024 Oscars for stuff released this year.
That mean DiCaprio is going to get a second Oscar?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think that the dark horse for me is Cillian Murphy. I think still has a good chance at winning Best Actor for Oppenheimer, but I don't think
he deserves it.
I don't think Oppenheimer is going to win Best Picture. And I think Oscar voters are going to have a decision to make between Best Director of picking Nolan and giving him his first Best Director Oscar or going ahead and give it to Scorsese. So,
yeah.
But I'm calling it now. I think Killers of the Flower Moon is your Best Picture winner. Because I'm familiar with some of that history, dark side of American history. But anyway, back to Dune Part 2. I think this will be, and this is one of my most anticipated movies of of 23, which is really the only reason we're talking about part 1 right now is because we're both geeked out about
part 2.
About part 2, yeah.
It's finally coming. So going back to part 1, I do have to bring up I really loved how they opened the film. So, because before any of like Warner Brothers logo, any of like the different studios logo, you just have that, the Bene Gesserit kind of speech going on, or whatever, like the unintelligible speech that's kind of happening. And it just opens with that line, was like, dreams are messages from the deep. And just really enjoyed that. I really loved that, just because it kind of almost felt like what we are about to see is also like kind of a dream, or like this is the message, like this happened, or this, is going to happen, kind of a thing. So it was really, really nice. But I just got to say, this entire movie was just really thought out, really planned. I mean, the costume design, the set decoration you were talking about, was just absolutely amazing. I mean, I could just, even some of like dialogue or how they handle the dialogue, like I can just think of how visceral Secundus is, where the Sardaukar assassins are training and stuff like that. Like just that whole scene of just the guy kind of, putting them out to war and yelling at them as they're kind of, walking around the different priests or whatever. And just
that scene is crazy.
Yes. Like
that scene is nuts.
Yeah. But how visceral all of these different planets are, like when they did Gaidi Prime for the Harkonnens, like, and Caledon for the Atreides, and just how different and how it wasn't kind of the same looking kind of planet, or wasn't very similar that you kind of get in a lot of sci-fi things, where kind of everything blends into it, just like very different of, exactly where you're at.
Yeah. And that's the speaking of the Sardaukar, that was something that the 84 movie just kind of glossed over, was the brutality of that planet and that people group, basically. And yeah, that scene, I remember leaving the theater. The first thing I did was went to YouTube and pulled up, somebody had snuck out the whole sequence when they go to the Sardaukar planet, and you see them lined up, and yeah, they're freaking crucifying. So if you Google it, those guys they're crucifying on those walls, and then their blood is mixing with water, and then it's being poured on Sardaukar troops. Those are failed recruits. That's what they do when you don't make the cut.
Yep.
Brutal. And then they did that whole weird thing with the guy that's doing the chant, where he's got that suit on, and you could tell his neck is elongated. So it looks it's really off-putting. There are visual cues in this movie that do that are like, wait, that looks human, but that's not human. Yeah. And he tries to pepper that in.
Well, and going back to the fight choreography, like the coordinator was talking, how he tried to give each group their own fighting style. Like the Atreides had like a Filipino fighting style with a lot of short swords, whereas the Harkonnens had like something based off of ancient Mongolia with like a lot of hack and slash and just like big power movements, where Sardaukar had kind of this balance between like samurai and then also this kind of some like ancient kind of cult based, like where there's blood sacrifice and like kind of that same what we're kind of getting from this planet, and kind of melding that together, because they do have that kind of fluid movement of what we kind of imagine the samurai doing and such, but yet then you also get the viciousness of this cult apparently. So
that's great.
Yeah
That's great. So, yeah, I love those details. Yeah.
The only thing that kind of threw me, and it's been a while since I read the book, so I could completely wrong, and this is not a spoiler, but because I always remember the Atreides house kind of being based off of like Greece. So why do we have a Scottish bagpipe being walked across when the herald shows up?
Because bagpipes are cool, man. But actually, it worked out. The bagpipe, the origin of the bagpipe though is not Scotland, right? The bagpipe, isn't it like Arabia or Persia or something like that? Isn't it the actual
some form of it? I don't think like in the way that it was portrayed was definitely much more of the Scottish, but like the original bagpipe was not from there. So, but I think it's definitely changed.
I think subconsciously it works because the Atreides home planet, it looks like Scotland. Like it does. The rock islands rising up out of the water. It looks like Ireland or Scotland. And so
it was
that kind
Norway,
of fit.
but it was but same kind of hemisphere.
I could see that why that would kind of throw you.
Well, I just for a moment, but then they did do the payoff because obviously you have this little bagpipe just for this one scene of like the Emperor's Herald coming, but then the battle scene, they bring it back. Yeah. They bring that, like, obviously not the bagpiper, but like in the score is bagpipes and it just works. I mean, like the payoff of just Hans Zimmer happening. Oh my, like we got to talk about Hans Zimmer because he kills it. First off, he turned down Tenet for this movie.
Yeah, that's right.
Because he loved, he loved Dune so much. And he was like, no, I got to do this. Like, I can't work with you, Nolan. I have to do this movie. And he just killed it because he really went off, not off the deep end. It's not the right phrasing, but he definitely just kind of really dug into it and didn't go to his strengths that what he's done before, really tried something new and different with this score. And a lot of it is, it's hard sometimes to tell what's ambient noise or what's guttural tones and what's the score. You know, what is the sounds that we're hearing are the soundtrack and what's just the sounds of the desert or of the fighting or of space or those kind of things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, this is, we're spoiled. These are going to be, I just think part 2 is going to blow everything out of the water. I don't think when we're done with this, I think it'll obviously need to be watched as one continuous piece, but all the good stuff's going to happen in part 2.
I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff that happens in this. They did such a great job. So, I mean, if you would have told me that the guy who did Sicario was going to go on and do some of my favorite films of the past decade, I would not have. I mean, Sicario is great. I loved it, but I remember going into Arrival thinking this thing is going to be an absolute disaster and mess, and it's not. It is awesome. And then obviously Blade Runner 2049, he nailed it too, for something that has such a cult following, to have something that I walked out of and still enjoyed and still thought was absolutely great.
I hope that part 2 makes a lot of money because unfortunately, as great a director as he is, he doesn't really have the box office to back it up. I mean, Sicario did well. I think Arrival did well because the budget wasn't massive. But Blade Runner 2049, it obviously bombed. It's a tremendous movie. It's one of the best sequels I've ever seen to a movie that none of us asked for a sequel to, something as great as Blade Runner. But I guess it was sort of fitting that it suffered the same fate as Blade Runner, which was almost nobody watched it. But those of us that did adore it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope Dune Part 2, I hope everybody's gunning for it, and I hope it has a good marketing campaign. I think that's going to be the big one. And if they're smart, then in September or October, they'll go ahead and re-release Part 1 back into theaters.
Oh, and then like
they have to. Like, they got to pull the same thing as the lead up to Avatar, The Way of Water, when they re-released Avatar back into theaters. And, I didn't go to see it back in the theater the second time, but I knew some folks that did. So they're going to have to do that with Part 1. The Part 1 needs to go back into theaters for a couple weeks, give people an opportunity to experience it on the big screen like it's supposed to be. Get us all primed and ready for the November drop on Part 2.
I'm excited. It's going to be great.
It is.
It's going to be great.
Well, any closing thoughts before we wrap this sucker up?
I would say take the time to watch it. If you like the book Dune and haven't seen this, it's
who's that?
I know
who are these people?
I don't know. It's a great sci-fi film. It's definitely science fiction. It's not space fantasy like Star Wars. It's definitely in that sci-fi kind of realm. So go in with that, but it's shot really well. Amazing attention to detail, great acting. I really enjoyed it. And I just rewatched it again and was just as happy with it as I was previously.
Yeah, it's held up. I've seen it several times since watching it in IMAX. I think I saw it in IMAX. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Well, Yeah.
The only last thing, okay, we're going to go a little tangent because I just remember, is the sound design or whatever, at least on like the streaming services that it's on, not great. Or at least how I was watching it. Like, it is not leveled very well at all. Yeah, like some of the dialogue is way too soft, and then it gets way too loud for some of the action sequences. So you're
Christopher Nolan,
like,
is that you?
That was kind of one of my thoughts.
He had Christopher Nolan mix Dune. Unintelligible dialogue, loud background. Yeah.
So, but anyways, that's my last thought. Still go see it, or still see it. It's great.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, thank you for tuning into another one of our chats on a very good movie, Dune Part 1. If you like what you heard on the old YouTubes, like, subscribe, hit the bell, shoot us a comment. Love to extend the conversation past these videos onto our YouTube channel. And if you're listening on audio only, appreciate you. And we're just having
Leave
fun
us a review.
Dropping these. Yeah, we love talking about movies. And the big takeaway for us with this is we hope you watch more movies. And then we hope you have these same kind of conversations with your friends and your family. Yeah. And then maybe we can give you a nugget or two of something interesting that maybe you didn't know before, or something we're completely wrong on, and then you can call us out on the internet later. So either way, it's all good.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, enjoy. Thanks, everybody.